Picture this. You're standing in a parking garage, abandoned by the man you've trusted for 20 years, when suddenly the thunderous roar of helicopter blades echoes through the concrete structure. The wind whips your hair as a sleek aircraft descends, and through the pilot's window, you see a face from your past. Someone who represents everything your husband thinks you could never have. That moment when your husband's jaw drops as he realizes exactly who's coming to rescue you? Absolutely priceless. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first sign something was wrong should have been Derek's sudden obsession with his appearance. After 15 years of marriage, my husband had never been one to spend more than 5 minutes in front of a mirror. But lately, he'd been experimenting with expensive hair products and cologne that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Standing in our Pinnacle Peak master bathroom that Tuesday morning, I watched him adjust his tie for the 4th time, his reflection catching mine in the mirror. "Big presentation today?" I asked, refilling my coffee mug with the French roast. He'd started insisting we buy instead of our usual brand. "Something like that," Derek muttered, not quite meeting my eyes. "Might be late tonight. Crosstech is pushing hard on the Morrison account." The Morrison account. I'd heard that name thrown around our dinner table for months now, always accompanied by Derek's animated explanations about revolutionary software solutions and potential partnerships. As Vice President of Business Development at Crosstech Solutions, Derek had always been passionate about his work, but this particular client seemed to consume his thoughts entirely. "Don't wait up," he added, grabbing his briefcase and planting a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. The cologne was overwhelming, nothing like the subtle aftershave he'd worn throughout our marriage. "Nicole, I need you to handle Tyler's parent-teacher conference Thursday. Can't reschedule the client dinner." I nodded automatically, the same way I'd been nodding for months whenever Derek announced another evening commitment, another weekend. Obligation. Another reason why family plans needed to accommodate his increasingly demanding schedule. After stepping back from my marketing career when Sophia was born, I'd become the family's default coordinator, managing school events, medical appointments, and social obligations while Derek climbed the corporate ladder. "Mom, can you drive me to Jessica's after school?" Sophia called from downstairs, her voice carrying that particular teenage tone that suggested she'd already made plans regardless of my answer. "Sure, sweetheart," I called back, listening to Derek's BMW start in the driveway below. Through our bedroom window, I watched him back out with unusual haste, phone already pressed to his ear before he'd even reached the street. The house felt different after he left, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Tyler had already departed for his senior year classes, leaving me alone with the morning routine I'd perfected over the years. Load the dishwasher, start a load of laundry, review the family calendar on my phone, plan dinner for a family that seemed increasingly scattered. I settled into my home office, a converted spare bedroom where I managed our household finances and volunteered for various school committees. The computer screen illuminated Derek's credit card statement, something I reviewed monthly out of habit rather than suspicion. Most charges were predictable: gas stations, restaurants near his office, business expenses he'd later submit for reimbursement. But scrolling through recent transactions, several entries caught my attention. Charges at upscale restaurants I'd never heard of, always on Tuesday evenings when Derek claimed to be working late. A flower shop purchase last Thursday, though no flowers had appeared in our home. Most puzzling was a recurring charge to something called Aria Spa and Wellness, a name that meant nothing to me but appeared 3 times in the past month. My phone buzzed with a text from Sandra Hayes, my closest friend since our kids had played soccer together in elementary school. "Coffee later? Need to escape the chaos." Sandra ran a successful real estate business and understood the juggling act of managing family life while maintaining some semblance of personal identity. "Absolutely," I replied. 2 o'clock at Starbucks? Perfect. BTW. Saw Derek at Seasons 52 last week. Looked like an important business dinner. Seasons 52. I scrolled back through the credit card statement and found it. A Tuesday evening. Charge for over $200. Derek had mentioned grabbing a quick sandwich at his desk that night, complaining about how busy work had become. The unease that had been building for weeks suddenly crystallized into something sharper. Not quite suspicion, but certainly questions that deserved answers. I made a mental note to ask Derek about the dinner when he got home, though experience suggested he'd have a perfectly reasonable explanation that would make me feel foolish for asking. The afternoon meeting with Sandra provided a welcome distraction from my growing concerns. She'd chosen a corner table away from the main traffic. Flow, her business instincts always leading her toward private conversations. "You look tired," she observed after ordering her usual oat milk latte. "Everything okay at home?" "Just the usual chaos," I deflected, though Sandra's sharp eyes suggested she wasn't buying my casual response. "Derek's been working crazy hours. On this new account? Sometimes feels like I'm running a single-parent household." Sandra stirred her drink thoughtfully. "You know, I've been meaning to mention something. Last Thursday, I was showing a property in Paradise Valley, and I could have sworn I saw Derek coming out of one of those luxury apartment complexes. The Meridian, I think. Strange, because I didn't think Crosstech had clients in that area." My stomach tightened. Paradise Valley was 20 minutes from Derek's downtown office, in the opposite direction from our home. "Maybe he was meeting someone there," I suggested, though the explanation felt hollow even as I said it. "Maybe," Sandra agreed, but her tone suggested she harbored the same doubts I was beginning to feel. "Nicole, can I ask you something as a friend?" I nodded, dreading whatever observation she was about to share. "Have you noticed Derek seems different lately? More secretive, maybe?" I don't want to overstep, but Mike mentioned that Derek declined their last 2 golf invitations. Said he was always busy with work. Mike was Sandra's husband and Derek's longtime friend. Their monthly golf games had been a tradition for years, something Derek genuinely enjoyed and rarely missed. The fact that he'd been avoiding even recreational time with friends suggested a level of preoccupation that went beyond normal work. Stress. "He has been distracted," I admitted. "I assumed it was job pressure, but maybe there's something else going on." Sandra reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm probably reading too much into things. You know how suspicious I get from dealing with cheating spouses in divorce sales. But if you ever need to talk, really talk, I'm here." Driving home, Sandra's words echoed in my mind. Cheating spouses. The phrase felt foreign when applied to my own marriage, yet the unexplained charges, mysterious dinners, and behavioral changes were forming a pattern I couldn't ignore. That evening, Derek arrived home later than usual, his explanation involving traffic and a last-minute client call that ran long. He seemed unusually cheerful, almost energetic, quite different from the exhausted demeanor he'd been displaying for months. "How was your day?" he asked, settling into his recliner with a beer and the television remote. "Fine," I replied, settling beside him on the couch. "Sandra mentioned seeing you at Seasons 52 last week. Said it looked like an important business dinner." Derek's hand paused momentarily on the remote before continuing to scroll through channels. "Oh, that. Yes, potential client meeting. Very preliminary stuff. Probably won't amount to anything." "What kind of business? You didn't mention it." "Tech consulting. Boring details you wouldn't be interested in." His tone carried a subtle dismissiveness that stung more than it should have. "How's Tyler doing with his college applications?" The subject change felt abrupt, clearly intended to redirect our conversation away from his work activities. I let him guide us toward safer topics, but the questions multiplied in my mind. When had Derek started assuming I wouldn't be interested in his work? When had our conversations become so surface level that he felt comfortable dismissing my curiosity? Later that night, as Derek slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and tried to remember the last time we'd had a genuinely intimate conversation. Not just coordination about schedules and responsibilities, but real communication about hopes, fears, dreams, or even daily experiences. The realization that I couldn't pinpoint such a moment was deeply unsettling. Thursday brought the parent-teacher conference Derek had asked me to handle alone. Tyler's grades were excellent, his teachers full of praise for his maturity and college readiness. As I sat in the familiar classroom environment, surrounded by other parents navigating similar conversations, I felt a profound sense of isolation. Derek should have been there, sharing this proud moment as our firstborn prepared for the next chapter of his life. The conference ran later than expected, and by the time I reached the school parking lot, the afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the asphalt. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Derek, unusual for someone who typically sent brief texts rather than actually calling during work hours. I returned his call as I started the car, expecting to hear about some scheduling conflict or household emergency. "Nicole, where are you?" Derek's voice carried an edge of irritation I rarely heard. "Tyler's school. The parent-teacher conference you asked me to handle, remember?" "Right, of course. Listen, I need you to pick up my dry cleaning before they close. The blue suit and those shirts I dropped off Monday. Derek, it's already 4:30. The cleaners close at 5 and I need to get Sophia from her friend's house. Can't you ask Sandra to get Sophia? This is important. I need that suit for tomorrow's presentation." The presumption in his request that I should rearrange multiple people's schedules to accommodate his last-minute need sparked an unfamiliar anger. "Why didn't you mention this earlier? Or pick it up yourself during lunch?" "Because I'm busy, Nicole. I'm working to support this family while you spend your afternoons having coffee with friends." The accusation hung between us like a physical blow. In 15 years of marriage, Derek had never diminished my contributions to our family or suggested that my activities were frivolous. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The person on the other end of the phone sounded like a stranger wearing my husband's voice. "I'll see what I can do," I managed, ending the call before I said something that would escalate the situation further. But as I drove toward the dry cleaners, Sandra's words echoed in my mind with new urgency. Cheating spouses, behavioral changes, secretiveness, sudden criticism of previously accepted routines. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore, even for someone who had spent 2 decades trusting without question. That evening, Derek seemed oblivious to the tension our earlier conversation had created. He thanked me briefly for retrieving his dry cleaning, then spent the evening absorbed in his laptop, claiming to prepare for the next day's presentation. When I attempted to share details about Tyler's conference, he offered distracted responses that made it clear his attention was elsewhere. I went to bed that night with a growing certainty that my marriage was in trouble, though I still couldn't define the exact nature of that trouble. Derek's behavior suggested someone whose priorities had shifted dramatically, someone who no longer valued the partnership we'd built together. Whether that meant an affair, a midlife crisis, or simply growing apart, I couldn't yet determine. But lying in the darkness, listening to Derek's steady breathing beside me, I made a decision that would prove more significant than I realized at the time. I was going to find out exactly what was happening to my marriage, even if the truth turned out to be painful. The woman who had spent 2 decades accommodating, trusting, and supporting was about to become someone entirely different. Someone who asked hard questions and demanded honest answers. Someone who refused to be dismissed or taken for granted. Someone who was prepared to fight for her family, even if that fight revealed truths she wasn't ready to face. The transformation had begun, though I wouldn't understand its full scope until a helicopter's rotor blades changed everything forever. The photograph changed everything. I discovered it purely by accident, wedged between Derek's laptop and its carrying case when I was cleaning his home office the following Tuesday morning. The image showed Derek and a woman I didn't recognize sharing what appeared to be an intimate dinner at an upscale restaurant. Her hand rested on his arm in a gesture that spoke of familiarity, comfort, possession. Derek's expression was one I hadn't seen directed toward me in months: genuine happiness, engagement, the look of a man completely captivated by his companion. The woman was stunning in an effortless way that made my stomach clench with recognition of my own insecurities. Blonde hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and her smile radiated the kind of confidence I'd once possessed, but had somehow lost along the way. She appeared to be in her early 30s, young enough to represent everything I felt I was no longer, yet sophisticated enough to fit seamlessly into Derek's professional world. I studied the photo with the detached, analytical skills I'd developed during my marketing career, searching for clues about when and where it had been taken. The restaurant's distinctive lighting and decor looked familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. Derek wore the blue shirt I'd ironed for him last Thursday, the same evening he'd claimed to be working late on budget projections. My hands trembled as I photographed the image with my phone before carefully returning it to its original position. The evidence was undeniable, yet part of me still hoped for an innocent explanation. Perhaps she was a client, a colleague, someone whose presence in Derek's life had a legitimate professional justification. But the body language in the photograph suggested a level of intimacy that transcended business relationships. I spent the morning researching private investigation services in Phoenix, though the very act of doing so felt like crossing a line I'd never imagined approaching. The websites all promised discretion, professionalism, and results that would provide clarity in situations exactly like mine. But hiring a detective felt like admitting defeat, acknowledging that my marriage had deteriorated to the point where surveillance had become necessary. Instead, I decided to conduct my own investigation, starting with the credit card statements I'd been reviewing with increasing frequency. This time, I approached them with a different mindset, looking not just for unusual charges, but for patterns that might reveal a hidden routine. The Aria Spa purchases occurred every other Tuesday, always in the late afternoon. The expensive restaurant bills followed a similar pattern, clustered around specific days of the week when Derek claimed to be attending client meetings or working late. Cross-referencing these charges with Derek's work calendar proved illuminating. Many of the dates when large restaurant bills appeared corresponded with evenings when Derek had told me he was too busy to attend family events or school functions. The spa charges coincided with days when Derek had seemed particularly concerned about his appearance, returning home with freshly styled hair and an unusual attention to grooming details. I created a spreadsheet to track the patterns, my marketing background providing the analytical framework to organize the information systematically. What emerged was a clear picture of someone maintaining a double life, complete with regular appointments and expensive gestures that existed entirely outside our family's awareness. The most damning discovery came when I accessed our shared cloud storage account to look for photos from Tyler's recent soccer tournament. Buried in a folder labeled Work Documents were images Derek had apparently forgotten to delete. They showed the same blonde woman from the restaurant photo, this time in more casual settings. One captured her laughing at what appeared to be a hiking trail, dressed in athletic wear that showcased a figure maintained through obvious dedication to fitness. Another showed her in Derek's BMW, taken from the passenger seat with the kind of intimate spontaneity that suggested their relationship had progressed far beyond professional interaction. But it was the final photo that truly shattered any remaining illusions about Derek's fidelity. The image showed the woman lying in bed, clearly taken in the morning light of what I recognized as a hotel room. Her expression was sleepy, content, utterly relaxed in a way that spoke of deep familiarity with whoever was behind the camera. She wore Derek's cross-tech polo shirt, the same one he'd claimed to have left at the office the previous week. I stared at the photo until my eyes burned, trying to process the reality that my husband of 15 years had not only been unfaithful, but had been documenting his infidelity with casual disregard for the devastation such evidence could cause. The carelessness suggested either supreme confidence that I would never discover his activities or complete indifference to the consequences of being caught. My phone rang, startling me from my paralyzed contemplation. Sandra's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with a voice that sounded foreign to my own ears. "Nicole, are you all right? You sound strange." "I found photos," I said simply, the words emerging before I could consider their impact. "What kind of photos?" "The kind that confirm everything we suspected." Sandra's sharp intake of breath conveyed her immediate understanding of the situation's gravity. "Where are you right now?" "Home. Derek's at work. The kids are at school. I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." Within 20 minutes, Sandra had arrived with coffee and the kind of determined expression that had made her one of Phoenix's most successful real estate agents. She reviewed the evidence methodically, her business instincts providing the objectivity I couldn't muster. "This isn't a casual affair," she concluded after examining the photos and financial records. "This is a full relationship. Look at the timeline. This has been going on for at least 6 months, probably longer." "What am I supposed to do with this information?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of Derek's deception. "First, you document everything. Print copies, save files to your personal accounts, create a paper trail that can't be deleted or modified. Then you decide whether you want to confront Derek or gather more information first." "More information about what?" Sandra's expression grew grim. "About whether he's planning to leave you, whether he's been moving assets, whether this relationship is serious enough that he's making long-term plans. Nicole, men don't usually maintain this level of documentation unless they're either completely careless or preparing for something bigger." The possibility that Derek might be planning to leave our marriage hadn't occurred to me, though it explained the gradual emotional distance and increasing criticism of my lifestyle. If he was building a case for divorce, portraying me as boring, and unambitious would support a narrative that our marriage had simply run its course. "I need to know who she is," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "Leave that to me," Sandra replied. "Real estate gives me access to databases and professional networks that can help identify people. If she lives in Paradise Valley, I can probably figure out her name and address within a day or two." That afternoon, while Derek attended what he described as a budget review meeting, I began the process of protecting myself legally and financially. I contacted James Rivera, a divorce attorney Sandra had recommended, explaining that I needed a consultation about asset protection in marriage dissolution cases. His availability for the following morning suggested that my situation was neither unique nor particularly urgent in the world of family law. I also opened a separate checking account at a different bank, transferring a modest amount from our joint savings to ensure I had independent access to funds. The action felt simultaneously reasonable and deeply sad, a practical acknowledgement that the marriage I'd invested 15 years of my life building was likely beyond repair. Derek returned home that evening in an unusually cheerful mood, humming while he sorted through the mail and commenting positively about dinner preparations. His good spirits felt grotesque, given what I now knew about his activities, but I maintained normal conversation while studying his behavior for additional clues. "How was the budget meeting?" I asked as we sat down to eat. "Productive. Very productive." Derek's smile seemed genuine, which only deepened my sense of living with a stranger. "Crosstech is expanding faster than anyone anticipated. Lots of opportunities for advancement." "That's wonderful. Will the expansion affect your travel schedule?" Derek paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, and I caught a flicker of something. Calculation, perhaps, before he answered. "Possibly. There might be some overnight trips to Los Angeles and San Diego over the next few months. Client development requires face-to-face relationship building." I nodded appropriately, while wondering whether these future business trips were genuine or whether Derek was laying groundwork for extended time away from home. The ease with which he discussed potential travel suggested someone comfortable with deception, someone who had been practicing lies until they felt as natural as truth. Later that evening, as Derek worked on his laptop in the living room, I retreated to our bedroom and called Marcus Thompson. Marcus had been my closest friend. During college, a relationship that had evolved into a successful helicopter tour business in Phoenix after his military service. We'd maintained contact over the years, though Derek had always seemed uncomfortable with my friendship with someone he considered overly adventurous and unconventional. "Nicole? This is a surprise. How are you?" "I've been better," I admitted. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I promise I'll explain more later. Do you still do private helicopter services? Not tours, but transportation." "Of course. Corporate executives, special events, emergency situations. Why? Are you planning something exciting?" "Potentially. Can I call you tomorrow? I might need your help with something unusual." "You've got my curiosity up now. Whatever you're planning, count me in. You know I've always been ready for an adventure." After ending the call, I felt a strange sense of anticipation that had nothing to do with romantic possibility and everything to do with reclaiming some sense of personal agency. Marcus represented a part of my life that Derek had gradually discouraged, the part that had once embraced spontaneity and risk. The fact that Derek disapproved of our friendship now seemed less like reasonable caution and more like controlling behavior designed to limit my independence. The meeting with James Rivera the following morning provided clarity about the legal landscape I was entering. Arizona's community property laws meant that assets acquired during marriage would be divided equally unless a prenuptial agreement specified otherwise. Since Derek and I had married young and optimistic, no such agreement existed. "The key question," James explained, "is whether your husband has been hiding assets or preparing for divorce without your knowledge. Men who plan to leave often start moving money months or even years before filing papers. How would I know if that's happening? We'd need to examine all financial records, including business accounts, investment portfolios, and any assets he might have acquired separately. If he's been planning this for a while, there might be accounts or investments you don't know about." James provided a checklist of documents to gather and recommended a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden assets in divorce cases. The complexity of the process was overwhelming, but the alternative, remaining ignorant while Derek potentially planned my financial devastation, was unacceptable. That afternoon, Sandra called with information about Derek's companion. Her name is Brittany Walsh. She's 32, works as a marketing consultant, lives in a luxury apartment complex in Paradise Valley. No husband, no kids, drives a white Lexus. I also discovered something interesting. She's been working with Crosstech as an independent contractor for the past 8 months. The timeline aligned perfectly with the beginning of Derek's behavioral changes. Their relationship had clearly evolved from professional to personal, with Derek's position at Crosstech providing the perfect cover for extended contact. The fact that she was also in marketing stung particularly deeply, as if Derek had sought out a younger, more attractive version of the woman I'd once been. "There's more," Sandra continued. "I checked property records, and Brittany's apartment rent is $4,800 a month. That's expensive even for Paradise Valley, especially for someone who's theoretically working as an independent contractor. Either she's extremely successful or someone is helping with her expenses." The implication was clear. Derek might be financing Brittany's lifestyle using our family's resources, turning our joint savings into support for his affair. The possibility that my own money was funding my husband's betrayal added a layer of violation that went beyond emotional infidelity. That evening, I watched Derek with new eyes, searching for signs of deception in every gesture and expression. When he mentioned working late the following day, I made a mental note to drive by his office building. When he spent 30 minutes in the bathroom preparing for bed, I wondered whether he was texting Brittany. Every routine interaction felt like a performance designed to maintain the illusion of normal marriage while concealing activities that were systematically destroying our family. But along with the pain and anger, I felt something unexpected emerging. A cold determination that surprised me with its intensity. Derek clearly believed he could manipulate and deceive me indefinitely, that I would remain the compliant wife who managed his household while he pursued excitement elsewhere. He had underestimated the woman he'd married, forgotten that I'd once been capable of independent thought and decisive action. As I lay awake that night, listening to Derek's peaceful breathing beside me, I began formulating a plan that would force him to confront the consequences of his choices. I was tired of being a passive victim in my own life, tired of discovering humiliating truths while Derek controlled the narrative of our marriage. If he wanted to destroy our family for a relationship with a woman young enough to be impressed by expensive dinners and secret hotel rendezvous, he was going to learn that actions carried consequences. The next phase of my investigation would require courage I wasn't certain I possessed, but the alternative, continuing to live as an unknowing participant in Derek's elaborate deception, was no longer tolerable. The woman who had once built successful marketing campaigns and managed complex projects was still inside me somewhere, and it was time to let her take control of this situation. Derek had made a critical error in assuming I would remain ignorant and compliant. He was about to discover exactly how wrong he could be. The surveillance began on a Wednesday morning when Derek announced another late client dinner. I'd spent the previous 2 days preparing for this moment, purchasing a small digital camera with a telephoto lens and mapping out the locations I'd discovered through my investigation. The Crosstech building sat in downtown Phoenix's business district, a gleaming tower with underground parking and multiple exit points that would require strategic positioning to monitor effectively. I positioned myself across the street at a coffee shop with outdoor seating, ordering a drink I had no intention of finishing while keeping my eyes fixed on the building's main entrance. Derek's BMW was parked on the 3rd level of the attached garage, visible from my vantage point through the structure's open design. The waiting felt interminable, each passing minute stretching like hours as office workers streamed out of the building in the late afternoon exodus. At 6:15, Derek emerged from the elevator bank with a woman who matched Brittany Walsh's description perfectly. Even from a distance, her confidence was unmistakable, the way she moved through space with absolute certainty of her welcome wherever she went. Derek's body language around her was completely different from his interactions with me, animated and attentive in a way that made my chest tighten with recognition of what I'd lost. They walked to Derek's car together, their conversation punctuated by laughter that carried across the parking structure. I captured several photographs of them, together, the camera's zoom function revealing details that confirmed their intimate familiarity. Brittany's hand rested naturally on Derek's arm as they talked. Derek opened her car door with old-fashioned courtesy he hadn't shown me in years. Most damning was the brief but unmistakable kiss they shared before separating to their respective vehicles. Following them required careful distance management through Phoenix's evening traffic. They drove to Scottsdale Fashion Square, the upscale shopping center where Derek and I had celebrated anniversaries during better times. The irony of the location wasn't lost on me. He was now taking his mistress to places that held significance in our marriage, either from carelessness or deliberate cruelty. I watched from the parking area as they entered an expensive steakhouse, Derek's hand placed possessively on Brittany's lower back as they approached the hostess station. The restaurant's floor-to-ceiling windows provided perfect visibility into their dinner, and I settled into my car with the camera, documenting their evening with methodical precision. What I witnessed over the next 2 hours shattered any remaining hope that Derek's affair might be a temporary midlife crisis. Their interaction displayed the comfortable intimacy of a well-established couple. Brittany fed Derek bites from her plate. Derek reached across the table repeatedly to touch her hand, her arm, her face with casual possessiveness. They leaned into each other's space, their conversation intense and engaged in a way that spoke of shared jokes, inside references, and genuine emotional connection. When Derek excused himself to use the restroom, Brittany pulled out her phone and began taking selfies with the restaurant's ambiance as backdrop. Her expression was radiant, the look of a woman completely secure in her relationship status. She wasn't hiding their connection or worried about being discovered. This wasn't a guilty affair conducted in shadows, but a confident relationship that Derek was simply concealing from his inconvenient family obligations. The most devastating moment came when Derek returned to the table carrying a small wrapped box. Even from my distant observation point, Brittany's delighted reaction was unmistakable. She opened the gift to reveal what appeared to be jewelry, her enthusiasm genuine and overwhelming. Derek stood to clasp a necklace around her neck, the gesture tender and ceremonial. They kissed across the table, a longer, deeper embrace that left no doubt about the physical nature of their relationship. I documented everything, the camera's memory card filling with images that would serve as irrefutable evidence of Derek's systematic betrayal. But beyond their legal utility, the photographs forced me to confront the reality that my husband hadn't simply strayed from our marriage. He had built an entirely separate life with someone else. The drive home felt surreal, navigating familiar streets while my mind processed the extent of Derek's deception. He hadn't just been unfaithful, he'd been actively courting another woman with the same gestures and attention he'd once shown me. The necklace purchase represented money taken from our joint accounts to buy gifts for his mistress, a financial betrayal that compounded the emotional devastation. Derek arrived home 3 hours after I did, his explanation involving a client emergency that had extended their dinner meeting significantly. He seemed relaxed and satisfied, the demeanor of someone whose evening had gone exactly as planned. When I asked about the client's concerns, Derek provided vague responses about software integration challenges, his answers confident enough to suggest he'd prepared this story in advance. The following morning brought a call from James Rivera with updates about the forensic accounting investigation. "We've uncovered some concerning patterns," he reported. "Your husband has been moving money into investment accounts you weren't aware of, and there's evidence of significant cash withdrawals that don't correspond to documented expenses." "How much money are we talking about?" "Over the past 8 months, approximately $60,000 has been moved or withdrawn from your joint accounts. The transactions were spread out to avoid triggering automatic notifications, but the pattern is clear when examined comprehensively. $60,000. The number represented months of Derek's salary, money that should have been securing our family's future but had instead been funding his affair. I thought about Brittany's expensive apartment, her designer clothes, the jewelry Derek had presented with such ceremony. My own financial contributions to our marriage, through years of managing household expenses and foregoing my own career advancement, had subsidized Derek's betrayal. "What are my options?" I asked James. "We can file for immediate asset protection, freezing joint accounts, and requiring court approval for major financial decisions. It's aggressive, but given the evidence of financial misconduct, a judge would likely approve the request." The decision felt momentous, a point of no return that would irrevocably alter the landscape of my marriage. But Derek's actions had already crossed lines that made reconciliation impossible. He'd chosen to systematically deceive and financially exploit our partnership while building a future with another woman. Protecting myself wasn't vengeful. It was necessary. "File the paperwork," I instructed James. "I want the accounts frozen by Monday." That afternoon, I met with Marcus Thompson at his helicopter tour office near Scottsdale Airport. The facility was larger and more sophisticated than I'd expected, with multiple aircraft and a staff that suggested Marcus had built a genuinely successful business. He greeted me with the same infectious enthusiasm that had made him such a compelling presence during college, though the years had added maturity and focus to his natural charisma. "You look troubled," he observed as we settled in his office. overlooking the airfield. "This isn't a social visit, is it?" "Derek's having an affair," I said simply, surprising myself with how easily the words emerged. "It's been going on for months, and I have evidence that he's been using our money to support her." Marcus's expression darkened with protective anger. "That bastard. Nicole, I'm sorry. What can I do to help?" I need to confront him in a way that makes it impossible for him to lie or manipulate the situation. He's become very skilled at controlling conversations and making me doubt my own perceptions. "And you think a helicopter might help with that somehow?" I explained my developing plan, the idea that had been forming since discovering Derek's relationship with Brittany. Derek valued appearance and status above almost everything else. His affair with a younger woman was partly about ego and the validation of still being attractive to someone like Brittany. If I could demonstrate that I had options he'd never considered, that I wasn't the dependent housewife he'd begun treating me like, it might shatter his assumptions about controlling our divorce proceedings. "So, you want to stage a dramatic rescue?" Marcus asked, his grin suggesting he found the concept appealing. I want to remind Derek that he doesn't know everything about my life or my capabilities. He's been treating me like I'm boring and predictable, someone who will accept whatever he decides to do with our marriage. I want him to realize he's miscalculated. Marcus leaned back in his chair, considering the logistics. "When and where are you thinking?" "This Saturday. Derek's taking Brittany to some charity gala at the Scottsdale Fashion Square. It's a public event where they'll be seen together for the first time, essentially announcing their relationship to Derek's professional network. He's told me he has to work late, but I know the truth." "You want to confront them at the gala?" "Not exactly. I want to be there when they leave, when Derek thinks he's succeeded in publicly transitioning from his secret affair to an open relationship. I want him to see that I'm not the woman he thinks I am." Marcus nodded slowly, his expression indicating he understood both the practical and psychological aspects of what I was proposing. "This is about reclaiming your power." "Exactly. Derek has spent months making me feel invisible, irrelevant, boring. He's convinced himself that I'm someone who will accept being discarded without a fight. I want to show him he's wrong." We spent the next hour discussing timing, logistics, and the various permits required for the operation I was envisioning. Marcus's enthusiasm for the project was infectious, his confidence that we could execute something memorable helping to solidify my own determination. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking positive action rather than simply reacting to Derek's choices. That evening, Derek announced the charity gala with casual confidence, his story about mandatory attendance for Crosstech's community relations carefully rehearsed. He described the event as tedious but necessary, a performance designed to make me grateful for being excluded from something I would presumably find boring. "Will any of the other wives be there?" I asked innocently. "A few, but it's really a business networking function. You'd be bored to death by all the corporate talk." His dismissive tone, once hurtful, now felt simply pathetic. Derek truly believed he could continue managing my perceptions indefinitely, that I would remain the compliant wife who accepted his explanations without question. The condescension that had gradually eroded my self-confidence was about to become the foundation of his humiliation. I spent Friday making final preparations for Saturday's confrontation. The forensic accountant had provided detailed documentation of Derek's financial misconduct, including copies of checks written to cover Brittany's apartment rent and credit card bills. James Rivera had prepared asset protection papers that would freeze Derek's access to our joint accounts effective Monday morning. Sandra had agreed to document the evening's events from the shopping center, providing additional evidence of Derek's public relationship with his mistress. Most importantly, I'd purchased a dress that represented everything Derek claimed to find boring about me. The elegant black cocktail dress was sophisticated, flattering, and expensive, the kind of outfit I'd stopped buying when Derek began criticizing my appearance and spending. I'd also made an appointment at an upscale salon, investing in professional hair and makeup that would remind Derek of the woman he'd fallen in love with years earlier. As I prepared for bed Friday night, Derek seemed unusually nervous about the following evening's event. He spent extra time selecting his outfit, asked multiple questions about whether his appearance met professional standards, and made several references to the importance of making a good impression on potential clients. His anxiety suggested that Saturday's gala represented something significant in his relationship with Brittany, possibly their first public appearance as a couple. "You seem stressed about this event," I observed as Derek examined himself in our bedroom mirror. "It's a big opportunity for Crosstech. A lot of important people will be there." "Including anyone I might know?" Derek's pause was almost imperceptible, but I caught the moment of calculation before he answered. "Probably not. Most of the attendees are from the tech and consulting industries." The lie was so smooth that it might have been convincing if I hadn't already confirmed Brittany's attendance through social media research. She'd posted about shopping for the perfect dress, mentioning her excitement about a special evening with someone important. Derek's confidence in his ability to deceive me was about to become his greatest liability. Saturday morning arrived. With the crystalline clarity that characterized Phoenix's winter weather, perfect conditions for helicopter operations. I spent the day in careful preparation, treating each element of my appearance and logistics like a military operation. The woman Derek would encounter that evening would be nothing like the predictable wife he expected to find waiting at home with dinner prepared and questions unasked. By 6 o'clock, as Derek prepared to leave for his fictional work obligation, I was ready to reclaim my narrative and remind my cheating husband that he'd seriously underestimated the woman he'd chosen to betray. The charity gala was everything Derek had promised it would be. An elegant affair filled with Phoenix's business elite gathering in the Fashion Square's grand ballroom. I arrived 30 minutes after the event's official start time, having coordinated my entrance with Marcus to ensure optimal timing for what would unfold later. The black cocktail dress I'd chosen commanded attention without being inappropriate, and the professional styling had transformed me into someone Derek wouldn't immediately recognize from across a crowded room. Sandra had positioned herself near the bar with a clear view of the entrance, her real estate connections providing natural cover for her presence at a networking event. She caught my eye with a subtle nod, confirming that Derek and Brittany had arrived 20 minutes earlier and were currently making rounds among the corporate tables near the silent auction displays. I accepted a glass of wine from a passing server and began my own circulation through the crowd, deliberately avoiding Derek's section while observing him from various angles throughout the ballroom. The transformation in his demeanor was striking. He moved with confidence and animation I hadn't seen in months, clearly energized by Brittany's presence and the opportunity to introduce her to his professional network. Brittany wore a stunning red dress that emphasized her figure and youth, the kind of outfit that would have made me feel self-conscious just months earlier, but now simply reinforced my understanding of Derek's priorities. She clung to his arm, with practiced elegance, laughing at his conversations and contributing comments that suggested she'd been carefully coached about the attendees and their business interests. What struck me most powerfully was how naturally Derek inhabited the role of Brittany's devoted companion. This wasn't a man struggling with guilt about his infidelity, but someone who had seamlessly transitioned into a new identity. He introduced Brittany to colleagues with the pride of someone showing off a prized acquisition, his body language suggesting ownership and satisfaction rather than the furtive anxiety of someone conducting a secret affair. I positioned myself near enough to overhear several of these introductions, Derek's explanations carefully crafted to suggest Brittany was a business associate whose presence at the gala had professional justification. But his colleagues' reactions indicated they weren't fooled by the transparent fiction. Knowing smiles and raised eyebrows suggested that Derek's relationship with Brittany was already common knowledge within his professional circle. "Nicole Patterson?" The voice belonged to Robert Chen, Crosstech's chief technology officer, and someone Derek had brought to our home for dinner parties in years past. I almost didn't recognize you. You look incredible. Thank you, Robert. It's wonderful to see you. Is Derek here tonight? I saw him earlier but haven't had a chance to connect. Robert's question carried undertones that suggested he was fishing for information about our marriage, perhaps wondering whether I was aware of Derek's very public relationship with his much younger companion. His expression combined curiosity with what might have been sympathy, the look of someone who possessed uncomfortable knowledge about my personal situation. Derek mentioned he might stop by, I replied with deliberate vagueness. He's been so busy with new client development lately. Yes, I've noticed he's been very focused on expanding the business. Robert's pause before the word focused was loaded with meaning. Well, please give him my regards when you see him. The conversation confirmed my suspicion that Derek's affair was no longer secret within his professional environment. His colleagues were witnessing his relationship with Brittany firsthand, which meant my humiliation was already public knowledge among people who had known us as a couple for years. Derek's decision to bring Brittany to this event represented a decisive step toward making their relationship official, regardless of his continuing deception at home. I spent the next hour documenting Derek and Brittany's interactions with careful discretion, using my phone's camera to capture images that would serve as evidence of their public relationship. They danced during the band's romantic sets, Derek's hands resting possessively on Brittany's waist as they moved together with obvious intimacy. They shared food from each other's plates during dinner, the casual familiarity of their gesture, suggesting months of comfortable domestic routine. Most significantly, Derek purchased several high-priced items during the silent auction bidding, including a weekend getaway package to Sedona that he immediately presented to Brittany with a theatrical flourish that drew applause from surrounding tables. The gesture was simultaneously romantic and strategic, demonstrating his financial generosity while making their relationship status unmistakable to everyone present. As the evening progressed toward its conclusion, I retreated to the parking garage to prepare for the confrontation I'd been planning throughout the week. Marcus had confirmed his position at the helicopter landing pad atop the adjacent office building, awaiting my signal to begin the approach that would transform this evening from Derek's triumph into his moment of reckoning. The parking garage's third level provided perfect concealment while offering clear sightlines to the elevators where Derek and Brittany would emerge when the gala concluded. I positioned myself behind a concrete pillar near the stairwell, close enough to intervene when the moment arrived, but hidden enough to observe their departure without premature discovery. At 10:45, the elevator doors opened to reveal Derek and Brittany in animated conversation about the evening's success. Derek's arm encircled Brittany's waist as they walked toward his BMW, their voices echoing off the garage's concrete surfaces with intimate laughter and shared observations about the people they'd encountered. That went better than I expected, Brittany was saying as they approached Derek's car. Your colleagues seemed very accepting of our relationship. They're sophisticated people, Derek replied, his tone suggesting satisfaction with how the evening had unfolded. They understand that sometimes marriages run their course naturally. Have you decided when you're going to tell Nicole? Derek's pause stretched long enough to suggest he was considering multiple options. Soon. I want to make sure all the financial arrangements are in place first. Nicole's going to be emotional about this, and I need to protect both of us from any dramatic reactions she might have. The casual dismissal of my expected emotional response was breathtaking in its callousness. Derek was discussing my anticipated devastation like a logistical challenge to be managed, another administrative detail in his transition from our marriage to his new relationship. The man I'd loved for 15 years had become someone capable of treating my feelings as inconvenient obstacles to his personal happiness. She's really not going to see this coming? Brittany asked, her tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than sympathy. Nicole's very focused on the kids and her routine, Derek explained with patronizing confidence. She's not the type to pay attention to subtle changes or ask difficult questions. She'll be shocked, but she'll adapt. She always does. The conversation continued as Derek unlocked his car and opened Brittany's door with exaggerated courtesy. Their discussion revealed detailed plans for Derek's departure from our marriage, including his intention to claim that our relationship had deteriorated due to my lack of ambition and boring lifestyle. He'd already consulted with a divorce attorney and had been moving assets to protect his financial interests during settlement negotiations. The timing couldn't be better, Derek continued as he settled into the driver's seat. Nicole's so predictable that she's probably home right now watching television and waiting for me to get back from my work event. She has no idea that her whole world is about to change. I stepped out from behind the pillar as Derek started. The car's engine, my movement catching Brittany's attention through the passenger window. Her expression shifted from contentment to confusion as she attempted to process my unexpected appearance, clearly struggling to understand why a strange woman was approaching their vehicle. Derek remained oblivious to my presence until Brittany grabbed his arm and pointed in my direction. The transformation in his expression when he saw me was immediately satisfying. Shock giving way to panic as he attempted to calculate how much of their conversation I might have overheard and what my presence in the parking garage might signify. Nicole? Derek's voice cracked slightly as he lowered the driver's window. What are you doing here? I attended the charity gala, I replied with calm precision. Lovely event. I particularly enjoyed watching you introduce Brittany to your colleagues as a business associate. Derek's face cycled through multiple emotions as he processed the implications of my statement. If I'd been inside the ballroom, I'd witnessed his public relationship with Brittany and heard enough of their current conversation to understand the scope of his deception. The careful narrative he'd been constructing about our marriage's natural deterioration was crumbling in real time. Nicole, I can explain everything, Derek began, his voice taking on the placating tone he used when attempting to manage difficult situations. This isn't what it looks like. Really? Because it looks like you've been systematically lying to me for months while using our joint finances to support your relationship with Ms. Walsh here. Brittany's sharp intake of breath suggested Derek hadn't fully informed her about the source of funding for their expensive dates and her apartment rent. The information that her lifestyle was being subsidized by Derek's wife clearly wasn't something she'd expected to learn during a romantic evening out. Derek, you said you were separated, Brittany interjected, her voice carrying a note of accusation that suggested she was reassessing her understanding of their relationship's timeline. We are separated, Derek replied quickly, though his flustered demeanor undermined the conviction of his statement. Emotionally separated. Nicole and I haven't been truly connected for years. Interesting perspective, I observed, especially considering you were sleeping in our shared bed just last night and asking me to pick up your dry cleaning this morning. The precision of my response clearly rattled Derek further, his confidence in his ability to control the conversation evaporating as he realized I possessed detailed knowledge of his activities and wasn't going to be easily manipulated or dismissed. It was at that moment that the distant sound of helicopter rotors began echoing through the parking garage, growing steadily louder as Marcus approached from the office building's landing pad. Derek's head turned toward the sound with confusion, clearly unable to process why aircraft noise was becoming increasingly prominent in what should have been a simple confrontation between estranged spouses. What is that? Brittany asked nervously, her earlier confidence completely dissolved. That would be my ride, I replied, unable to suppress a smile as the helicopter's spotlight swept across the parking garage's upper level. Derek's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching panic as the aircraft settled into a hovering position directly above our location. Its rotor wash creating a dramatic windstorm that sent loose papers and debris swirling around the concrete structure. The sound was overwhelming, making conversation impossible and transforming the enclosed space into something resembling a movie set. Marcus's voice crackled through a bullhorn from the helicopter's cabin. Mrs. Patterson, your transportation has arrived. Please proceed to the roof level for immediate departure. The theatrical precision of the moment was everything I'd hoped it would be. Derek and Brittany sat frozen in their vehicle, staring upward at the helicopter with expressions of complete bewilderment. The idea that I might have orchestrated such an elaborate response to their evening was clearly beyond Derek's conception of my capabilities or social connections. "You planned this?" Derek shouted over the rotor noise, his voice barely audible above the mechanical thunder. "Unlike some people, I don't leave important matters to chance," I replied, moving toward the stairwell that would take me to the building's roof access. Derek scrambled out of his car, apparently realizing that my dramatic departure might represent more than simple theatrics. If I had the resources and connections to arrange helicopter transportation on short notice, I might also have the capability to cause serious problems for his carefully planned transition from our marriage. "Nicole, wait! We need to talk about this reasonably." But the time for reasonable conversation had passed months earlier, when Derek first decided that our marriage was an obstacle to his happiness rather than a partnership worth preserving. The man who had spent the evening publicly celebrating his relationship with another woman while lying to me about working late had forfeited any claim to reasonable discussion. I reached the roof access door as the helicopter settled onto the building's landing pad, Marcus visible through the cockpit window with a grin that suggested he was thoroughly enjoying the evening's drama. The aircraft was sleek and professional, exactly the kind of impressive transportation that would reinforce Derek's growing realization that he'd seriously underestimated the woman he'd chosen to betray. Derek burst through the roof access door. Just as I reached the helicopter's passenger compartment, his expensive suit disheveled from his hurried pursuit, and his expression wild with panic and confusion. "Who is that?" he shouted, pointing at Marcus while struggling to be heard over the engine noise. "Someone who values loyalty," I replied, accepting Marcus's assistance into the passenger seat. "Nicole, you can't just leave. We have children. We have responsibilities." "We had a marriage," I corrected him. "You decided to terminate that arrangement in favor of other priorities. Now you get to experience the consequences of that decision." Derek's face contorted with a mixture of rage and desperation as the helicopter began its ascent, the dramatic downdraft from the rotors forcing him to step back from the aircraft. Through the passenger window, I could see Brittany standing beside Derek's BMW in the parking garage below, her red dress bright against the concrete as she stared upward at our departure with obvious shock. The view of Phoenix spreading out beneath us was breathtaking, the city's lights creating a glittering tapestry that stretched to the horizon. But more satisfying than the scenery was the knowledge that Derek was standing on that rooftop, finally understanding that the boring, predictable wife he'd taken for granted possessed resources and connections he'd never suspected. "Where to?" Marcus asked through the headset, his voice filled with satisfaction at the evening's successful execution. "Home," I replied. "I have some phone calls to make." The helicopter ride through Phoenix's night sky provided exactly the clarity I needed to execute the final phase of my plan. Marcus flew us over the city's sprawling landscape, giving me time to process the evening's events while Derek presumably stood on that rooftop, grappling with the reality that his predictable wife had just orchestrated the most dramatic play of his professional life. The view from above offered perspective in more ways than one. I could see the bigger picture of my situation with crystalline precision. "That was incredible," Marcus said through the headset as we circled back toward Scottsdale Airport. "Did you see his face when you got in? I thought he was going to have a heart attack." "Derek's always underestimated people," I replied, feeling a satisfaction deeper than simple revenge. Tonight, he learned that was a mistake. "So what's next? This was just the opening move, wasn't it?" Marcus understood strategic thinking from his military background, recognizing that dramatic gestures were most effective when they preceded decisive action rather than replacing it. The helicopter rescue had been designed to shatter Derek's assumptions about my capabilities and resources, setting the stage for conversations that would determine the actual terms of our separation. Now he'll be desperate to regain control of the narrative, I explained. He'll probably spend tonight trying to figure out who you are and how I arrange this. By tomorrow, he'll want to negotiate, which means he'll finally be ready to have an honest conversation about our marriage. We landed at Marcus's facility near midnight, the desert air crisp and clean after the emotional intensity of the evening's confrontation. Marcus walked me to my car with the protective concern of someone who'd witnessed domestic conflicts during his military service, ensuring I felt confident about returning home to face whatever Derek's reaction might bring. "Nicole, are you sure you're safe going back to the house?" Men like Derek don't handle humiliation well, especially public humiliation in front of their colleagues and girlfriends. "Derek's not violent," I assured him, though I appreciated Marcus's concern. "He's calculating and manipulative, but his weapons are psychological rather than physical. Tonight demonstrated that those weapons don't work on me anymore." "Call me if you need anything," Marcus insisted, handing me his business card with personal contact information written on the back. Helicopter extractions, witness transportation, or just someone to talk to who understands what it's like to fight back against people who underestimate you. The drive home through Pinnacle Peak's quiet neighborhoods gave me additional time to prepare for Derek's inevitable return. I expected him to arrive in a state of controlled fury, armed with accusations and demands for explanations that would allow him to reassert dominance over our relationship dynamics. Instead, I planned to maintain the same calm precision that had characterized the evening's helicopter departure, forcing Derek to confront the reality that our marriage's power balance had shifted permanently. The house felt different when I entered, no longer the comfortable family space where I'd accommodated Derek's needs and schedules for 15 years, but rather the foundation of a new life I was actively constructing. I changed from the cocktail, dressed into comfortable clothes, poured a glass of wine, and settled in the living room with the evidence files I'd been compiling throughout my investigation. The financial records James Rivera had uncovered painted a devastating picture of Derek's systematic theft from our joint accounts. Beyond the $60,000 already identified, additional transactions revealed that Derek had been funding Brittany's lifestyle for nearly 8 months, covering everything from apartment rent to credit card bills to vacation expenses. The total amount approached $90,000, money that should have been securing our family's future, but had instead subsidized Derek's affair. More damaging were the emails James's forensic accountant had recovered from Derek's deleted files, correspondence that revealed detailed discussions with divorce attorneys about strategy for minimizing financial settlements. Derek had been planning our divorce for months, consulting with legal experts about how to characterize our marriage as irretrievably broken due to my lack of ambition and contribution to our partnership. The most cynical discovery was Derek's intention to claim that I had become financially dependent and emotionally unstable, arguments designed to reduce his alimony obligations while painting himself as the responsible party seeking to escape an unhealthy relationship. The man who had encouraged me to step back from my career to support his advancement was now preparing to use that sacrifice against me in divorce proceedings. Derek's BMW pulled into our driveway at 12:45 in the morning, the headlights sweeping across our living room windows as he positioned the car with his usual precision. I heard him sit in the vehicle for several minutes before entering the house, presumably gathering his thoughts and preparing arguments that might help him regain control of our confrontation. When Derek finally entered through the garage door, his demeanor was carefully controlled rather than explosive. He'd clearly spent the drive home calculating his approach, recognizing that the evening's events required a more sophisticated response than simple anger or denial. "We need to discuss what happened tonight," Derek announced, settling into his recliner with forced casualness. "That display in the parking garage was completely inappropriate, Nicole. You embarrassed both of us in front of my professional colleagues." "I embarrassed us?" I repeated, setting down my wine glass with deliberate care. "Derek, you spent the entire evening introducing your mistress to people who've known us as a married couple for years. You purchased auction items for her using our joint credit cards while telling me you were working late, but somehow my presence at a public charity event was inappropriate?" Derek's confident facade wavered slightly as he processed my detailed knowledge of his activities. He'd clearly hoped that I'd witnessed only fragments of his evening with Brittany, leaving room for explanations that might minimize the significance of their public relationship. Brittany is a business associate, Derek began, though his tone lacked conviction. Crosstech has been working with her consulting firm on several projects. Her presence at tonight's event had legitimate professional justification. Is that why you've been paying her apartment rent for the past 8 months? I asked, producing the financial records from the folder beside my chair. Because according to these bank statements, you've transferred over $90,000 from our joint accounts to support Brittany's lifestyle. That seems excessive for a business relationship. Derek's face went pale as he recognized the documents I was displaying. The forensic accounting had uncovered transactions he'd clearly believed were hidden, forcing him to confront the reality that his financial misconduct was now documented with legal precision. "How did you get those records?" Derek demanded, his voice rising with the first genuine anger he'd shown since returning home. "The same way I arranged tonight's helicopter transportation," I replied calmly. "Derek, you've spent months treating me like I'm incompetent and boring, someone who would never question your explanations or investigate your activities. You forgot that I once had a successful career before I chose to support yours." "You're threatening me," Derek accused, though his tone suggested desperation rather than indignation. "I'm informing you about the legal reality of our situation. Tomorrow morning, James Rivera will file asset protection papers that freeze our joint accounts pending divorce proceedings. The financial misconduct you've engaged in violates Arizona's community property laws and constitutes grounds for an unequal division of our marital assets." Derek stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard pool, the same space where we'd hosted countless family gatherings and neighborhood barbecues during happier times. His body language conveyed a man calculating options and finding all of them unacceptable. "Nicole, let's be realistic about this," Derek said, attempting to recover his authoritative tone. "We both know our marriage has been struggling for years. We've grown apart, developed different interests and priorities. What happened with Brittany was symptom of larger problems between us, not the cause of them. So the solution was to steal our money to fund an affair while lying to me about working late?" "I wasn't stealing anything," Derek protested. "Those were joint accounts. I had every right to access that money for legitimate expenses." Legitimate expenses like Brittany's rent, her credit card bills, and romantic getaways to Sedona. I retrieved additional documents from my folder, spreading them across the coffee table between us. "Derek, I have photographs of you giving her jewelry purchased with our credit cards. I have hotel receipts for rooms you shared while telling me you were attending business conferences. I have text messages from your deleted files discussing how clueless I was about your activities." Each piece of evidence landed like a physical blow, Derek's confident demeanor crumbling as he realized the scope of my investigation. The man, who had spent months manipulating conversations and controlling information, was discovering that his victim had been gathering ammunition throughout his deception. "What do you want?" Derek asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want honesty, for the first time in months," I replied. "I want you to acknowledge what you've done to our family, instead of trying to blame me for problems you created. And I want you to understand that the woman you've been dismissing as boring and predictable just demonstrated that you don't know her at all." Derek returned to his chair, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. For the first time since his affair began, he was forced to engage with me as an equal rather than someone he could manipulate or dismiss. "How long have you known?" he asked. "I found the first evidence 3 weeks ago. The complete picture took longer to develop, but I've been documenting everything since then." "And the helicopter? That wasn't random. Marcus Thompson, we were close friends in college before you convinced me that maintaining friendships with other men was inappropriate for a married woman. He owns a helicopter tour company now. Very successful, very impressive. Exactly the kind of person you never, imagined I might stay in contact with. Derek's face reflected the dawning realization that his attempts to control and isolate me had been more transparent than he'd believed. The restrictions he'd placed on my friendships and activities hadn't been protective, but possessive, designed to limit my independence rather than strengthen our marriage. "Nicole, we have children to consider," Derek said, attempting to invoke Tyler and Sophia as leverage for negotiations. "Whatever problems exist between us, we need to prioritize their welfare." "Tyler and Sophia deserve parents who model integrity and honesty," I replied. "They deserve to understand that actions have consequences and that marriage requires mutual respect rather than deception and financial theft." "You're going to destroy our family over this?" "Derek, you destroyed our family when you chose to begin a relationship with another woman while systematically lying to your wife and children. I'm simply refusing to pretend that didn't happen." The conversation continued past 2 a.m, Derek cycling through various strategies designed to minimize his culpability while extracting concessions that might preserve his financial security. But the dynamic had shifted permanently. The woman he'd been dismissing as boring and predictable was now setting terms rather than accepting them. By dawn, we'd reached a preliminary agreement that acknowledged the irreparable damage to our marriage while establishing parameters for a civilized divorce. Derek would move out within the week, taking only personal belongings while leaving all marital assets frozen pending legal proceedings. He would maintain financial responsibility for Tyler and Sophia's immediate needs while surrendering any claim to primary custody given his demonstrated willingness to deceive them about his activities. Most importantly, Derek agreed to full financial disclosure and restitution for the money he'd diverted to support his relationship with Brittany. The $90,000 would be recovered through asset division adjustments, ensuring that his theft didn't ultimately cost our family the security he'd promised to provide. The following weeks brought a flurry of legal activity as James Rivera filed the necessary paperwork to formalize our separation agreement. Derek's attempts to negotiate more favorable terms were hampered by the extensive evidence of his misconduct, forcing him to accept conditions that reflected the reality of his choices rather than his preferred narrative about our marriage's natural deterioration. Brittany Walsh disappeared from Derek's life with remarkable speed once the financial support ended and the legal complications became apparent. The woman who had seemed so devoted during expensive dinners and romantic getaways proved less enthusiastic about Derek's company when it came without subsidized apartments and credit card payments. Her departure left Derek emotionally devastated while providing satisfying confirmation that their relationship had been more transactional than romantic. Tyler and Sophia handled their parents' divorce with the resilience that teenagers often display when adult dishonesty is finally acknowledged rather than concealed. Tyler expressed relief that the tension in our household had finally been explained, while Sophia initially blamed me for disrupting her familiar family structure, before gradually understanding the difference between causing problems and revealing them. "Mom, are you going to keep flying in helicopters?" Sophia asked one evening as we prepared dinner together, our new routine providing opportunities for conversations that had been impossible when our family dynamics revolved around Derek's schedule and preferences. "Probably not regularly," I replied, smiling at the memory of that dramatic evening. "But it's good to know that I can when the situation calls for it." 6 months after Derek's departure, I accepted a position with a Phoenix marketing firm that specialized in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation. The skills I developed during my investigation of Derek's activities translated perfectly to helping businesses navigate complex public relations challenges, and my legal background provided additional value in situations involving litigation or regulatory complications. Marcus Thompson became a regular presence in my life, though our relationship developed slowly and carefully, given the circumstances of our reconnection. His understanding of strategic thinking and appreciation for decisive action provided a foundation for friendship that felt completely different from the accommodating dynamic that had characterized my marriage to Derek. You know, Marcus observed during one of our weekend hiking trips in the Sonoran Desert, that night at the parking garage was probably the most satisfying extraction mission I've ever flown. Even more than your military operations? Those were about completing objectives and bringing everyone home safely, Marcus explained. That night was about watching someone reclaim their power from people who thought they could take it permanently. That's a different kind of satisfaction. Entirely. The legal proceedings concluded with a settlement that reflected Derek's financial misconduct while ensuring Tyler and Sophia's educational expenses remained fully funded. Derek retained his position at Crosstech, though his professional reputation suffered significant damage from the public exposure of his affair and the dramatic circumstances of our separation. The helicopter rescue had become legendary among Phoenix's business community, a cautionary tale about underestimating supposedly predictable spouses. 1 year after that transformative evening, I attended another charity gala at the same venue, where Derek had publicly celebrated his relationship with Brittany. This time, I arrived as the guest of honor, recognized for my volunteer work with an organization that provided legal assistance to women navigating divorce proceedings complicated by financial deception. The parking garage held no traumatic associations as I retrieved my car after the evening's festivities. Instead, walking through that space reminded me of the moment when I'd chosen to fight back against someone who had systematically undermined my confidence and independence. The concrete structure where Derek had expected to control another conversation had become the launching pad for a new life built on my own terms. As I drove home through Phoenix's glittering streets, I reflected on the journey from that devastating morning when I discovered Derek's affair to this evening when I'd been celebrated for helping other women navigate similar betrayals. The woman who had once accommodated and trusted without question had become someone who asked hard questions and demanded honest answers. Derek had been right about one thing. That evening's helicopter rescue had indeed blown my mind. Just not in the way he'd ever imagined when he made that promise about birthday surprises. Sometimes the most transformative gifts come disguised as betrayals, forcing us to discover strengths we never knew we possessed, and opening doors we never knew existed. The sound of helicopter rotors would always remind me that the most boring, predictable people are often the ones with the most surprising capabilities. And sometimes the best revenge is simply becoming the person your enemies never believed you could be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.